Hey, it's Mike Levin, 20 after 8, Friday, August 5th, 2016. Big day of videos, lots of videos. 20 after 8. I guess I've done worse. I really have to do better, though. I have to do better for Addie so that I can see her starting from as early as possible on Friday, when it's this situation, me driving up to meet her in the Catskills when she's at her grandparents' place. And yeah, I need to do better during the week to optimize. I am a search engine optimizer. I need to optimize my time with my kid, my weekend time. I am, of course, in the earliest stages of launching a plan to ask for a 4-day work week at some point. Even if the hours per day have to be adjusted in order to remain on the books as a full-timer. At least that's my idea, my proposition, for 10-hour days. And my reason for this is because 2 days a week is not enough with Addie. I would love to spend 3 days out of the week with her. I think that would be a lot more feeding of the soul for me, and I would like to think not a bad thing for her. And I'd like to take up more of the homeschool education responsibilities. And aside from meeting state standards, I want to go through the whole Tardigrade Circus curriculum with her, because there is lots to learn if you're going to try and invent and market the next generation's pet rock, because it's the gift that doesn't stop giving. If you think about it, from how are you going to find them, how are you going to see them, where are you going to keep them, how do you differentiate yours from others, how immersive would you like that experience to be with them, virtual reality wise, tiny robot wise. There's all kinds of options, not to mention the biological science stuff, because they have DNA and it's unusual, and I'm sure it's completely mapped, and there's so many varieties of these things, and the works, it's just their indestructibility aspect. The list goes on with these things called water bears, so yeah. But another thing that's been consuming me recently is the balance between that and doing a really bang-up job at work. My industry is a crazy one, and I've been calling myself a search engine optimizer at least since I moved to New York, and I guess it was 2005 or going into 2006, I believe. Before that, I was an in-house webmaster, jack of all trades kind of person. I started out in print production, but while I was a webmaster at my last thing I was doing in Philadelphia, I was earning a percentage of the company's net global income. Now, it's not net, it was gross. I was earning a percentage of gross. I had a very unique and novel opportunity in that even after they deducted out expenses, I got my variable component commission. And this insanely motivated me. It didn't turn out to be very much money, but just it being a thing made me do some of the best work of my life. I remember Adam Edwards was there, the guy who eventually brought me to New York, when I wrote the first few lines of my probably most inspired creation and least known, which was a generalized system, I called it at the time, but what it really was a VB script-based Ruby on Rails-like framework, which in a lot of ways had even better conventions than Ruby on Rails. It didn't go as far as scaffolding and code generators, but it did interrogate the tables and build a user interface around it automatically and give you a CRUD application just by virtue of taking a file and pointing to the first table that starts the relationship tree. And the user interface would even support those nested subtables up to a degree. So it was a perfect system for creating everything from order management systems to online web store, and it even ran the content management system for a while. It really was a fully capable CRUD MVC, model view controller, I think they call it. Before it was a popular thing, before lots of people were really even doing it. And it was VB script on old school active server page. And that was really a hoot. I was not into Linux and free and open source. I did a few sample installs. I think I installed Mandrake or Red Hat or one of those early versions, and got it to boot on my, I think, first 386 PC that I ever bought in my post-Amiga days, when I had to get PC familiar, but I didn't want to spend that much money on it. I got it at a user fair. I still remember it to this day. And I use that for a lot. And it was the beginning of my transition to Windows. And on Windows, I did active server page stuff, which when it leads to database stuff, naturally leads to Microsoft's offering, which is SQL Server. And that gets you into a whole host of interrelated technologies that lock you into Microsoft. And when Microsoft goes through one of these product shift, focus shifts that they did when they went from all that active server page stuff to .NET, it leaves a generation of people going, what? And those people had to flock out elsewhere. And they found a variety of things. A lot of them found PHP, and it created a very rich area that includes Facebook. It includes WordPress, it includes Drupal. And so it's a very strong camp, not going away anytime soon. It's a templating language made for the web and made to be easy. But then a lot of those people who were dissatisfied with PHP, finding it too similar to VB script before it on active server page, said, isn't there something better? And then this Ruby on Rails craze hit. It was an extraction from a project, I forget, Backpack or Basecamp, one of those things. But they really appealed to the cool kids crowd, those Mac people. Once Ruby got included with the default Mac distribution, and things like Homebrew came on the scene so that you could do really easy Linux compiles on a Macintosh reliably with a vibrant community behind it, bam, Ruby on Rails became elevated to kind of what PHP was, and even more so because it's an agile framework that you can hang your hat on as a career. You become a Rails person and you can always find a job, and probably pretty good, well-paying ones too. So end of story, right? There's awesome programming languages out there. Well, people languish over these choices all the time. And I languished over them for many, many years, hopping from language to language, being sold on the dream of each as I encountered it, having some extremely hypnotic people, instill their mantras into you, to the point where I still really believe that Lisp is the one true language. It's a language that can express all other languages, and until you try it, you are subject to the blub paradox. Because you have not experienced nirvana, you cannot know what nirvana is. Paul Graham. Okay, fine. Someday I'll take up, I guess, Common Lisp or Scheme or Clojure or one of the various Lisp dialects that can be used for realistic projects without having to build up layers from too deep down from scratch, because I don't want to start from linked lists. I want pre-built components. I like the right granularity level. So it's all about this crazy granularity, abstraction granularity thing. C is too granular. You have to build up your own libraries from scratch, and those libraries you create, you put so much work into them, you want to keep them with you for life, and they become your toolbox and your secret weapons. And can't you just give everyone a whole box of secret weapons? Well, sure you can. And can't you take care of the biggest problems in a language like C, which is keeping track of so much housekeeping? No, nothing cleans up after you. Okay, you give it garbage collection and memory protection and a security context, and you use a trick that's been around since BCPL and the rise of Unix in the 70s, when you call it new, and that's virtual machines. Java, it's got a virtual machine. Your P code is portable, and that's always the trick. That's everywhere in tech. Java didn't invent that by a long shot. In fact, the people to use it to greatest effect was probably the original Unix team of Ken Thompson and Dennis Ritchie, who made the combination operating system, language, and compiler, so that as long as you wrote the compiler for a new piece of hardware, you could boot the whole system, because once you had the compiler, you had the operating system. Once you had the operating system, you could, write applications to help you write code in using that language. That's the righteous cycle. So if you want to watch that positive feedback loop emerge in tech, follow the Aboriginal Linux project. It recently moved on to GitHub, and that I hope will give it the visibility to the type of people who really like that kind of project, the kind of people who are keeping the Levinix distro of Linux, my Linux distro. It's really more like a respin. I got a guy out there I drive crazy every time I say my version of Linux. But nonetheless, there's an interest in the smallest, tiniest, most portable, least dependencies, most statically compiled, existing on all platforms, file compatible, so that your virtual machine can come up identically no matter the host operating system, version of Linux. And that happens to be Levinix right now. There, is nothing that really will let you boot up, do something, have that something persistent, be able to quit out of that machine, walk over to another machine with a different operating system, plug it in, boot up that same exact virtual machine, and have back the state where you left off. I did that. I connected the dots between TinyCore Linux, an amazing distro of Linux by one of the collaborators on the also popular Damn Small Linux, Robert Shingledecker, who was responsible for one of the first municipal installations of Linux, designing it, supporting it. A real innovator, a leader, high level of bravery, and ability to take on the projects no one else wants to take on. He made TinyCore Linux, a 8 to 12, reports vary, megabyte version of Linux that can boot on a wide variety of hardware because its dependencies are so virtually nil. And it gives you a nice, dawn of computing era, 386, 686, probably usually 32-bit, x86 piece of hardware. And stuff runs on it. And all the server type stuff that runs on it runs really well. And you can do really neat tricks like my next thing I'm going to try and do is to host Jupyter Notebook off of Levinix. And I think that would be really cool. because it does away with what is that master thing you distribute with Linux that you build it into. What kind of server would you like to build Linux into? And before, in my mind, it was a zero web server. Python was the web server version of a Flask application running Pipulate to do my SEO tasks. Now I'm running my SEO tasks directly from Jupyter Notebook, a killer interface for Python that offers many and most of the things that I was cobbling together on a Flask web application that could run off of a software footprint that totaled 60 megabytes after everything was installed right down to Python and all the library dependencies. But now I'm throwing all that away, basically importing the functions of Pipulate over to SEO Notebook, which is Pipulate running in Jupyter Notebook. And that's my latest project, and it's awesome. And as awesome, the only thing as awesome as Jupyter Notebook is the project I'm doing in Jupyter Notebook, which is this next version of Pipulate, SEO Notebook. It'll eventually even be SEO Lab, and I know it keeps being a moving target, and sorry for that for people who have trouble following along, but things are always evolving. But it's gonna reach a nice productized state of equilibrium as soon as I'm on Jupyter Lab, because Jupyter Lab has these pane subdivisions, so you can have your notebook-like Python script over here, where you're debugging your code and you're running your experiments, but interfacing with widgets over here, both for input, so it can be little sliders, and for output, so it can be real-time visualizations coming out of a JavaScript library, something like d3js.org. The really cool stuff, the interactive stuff that lets you see data in whole new lights. There's been such demand for that from the Jupyter Notebook people that they already are on to Jupyter Lab that answers all that stuff, like, can't it be more languages than Python in Jupyter Notebook? Well, sure it can. It already is. Can't it do visualizations beyond the, I think it's called Matplotlib, that's built in, that's starting to look a little bit crusty, while creating very competent Excel-style graphs that you'd be very proud to copy and paste into an email. It is not the cool kid stuff of gravity springing around your data, revealing things as you shake it, kind of stuff that, you know, people like to do today. I like to do that stuff. I'm going to be relying on it to reveal the hierarchies that are inherent within sites based on the way they link their pages together. So I need places to, like, take the crawl data and to bake it into a node, probably a JSON node tree that I load into one of these JavaScript libraries, so that I can show a 3D pivotable, weighted, color-coded, segmented view, keyword labeled, if you like, clickable to pull up the pages, visualization of the link graph within your sites. I'm already trying to do it with some tools like Gephi. It's a Java local client running type thing, similar, I guess, to Screaming Frog, that type of Java software that runs everywhere. But unlike Screaming Frog, Gephi is in free and open source world, so you can just crawl a site, transform the crawl data, especially the link data from the crawl, the in-link stuff, into a JavaScript JSON object that represents those links and those nodes and lines between them. And bammo whammo, you've got yourself a high-tech 3D pivotable, gravity bouncy sitemap from a crawl. And you can see how the rhyme and reason, and oftentimes lack thereof, behind how you're interlinking the areas of your website. these are the types of projects I am currently in the act of carrying out, because everything's becoming gradually and subtly and consistently easier since one, I started using Jupyter Notebook. 2, started insisting that dependencies get installed usually through Anaconda, so that all platforms are created equal. And the thing I love about my Linux virtual machine now exists for Jupyter Notebook. I had Jupyter Notebook running on ARM on a C-Cube, that Israeli company, Solid Run, makes a tiny little server like a polished Raspberry Pi. It could run on a Raspberry Pi. Haven't done it yet, but all this certainly could. Database backending, no big deal. Everything's become easier since I learned to embrace pickles and shells, Python pickles and shells. Everything became easier since I moved to Python 3.5, where I can use all the most modern syntax, leave iteritems behind, and start using .items. Everything became easier since I learned how to properly use tuples, occasionally name those tuples, occasionally use ordered dicts, which are basically dictionaries constructed of tuples with some API overrides. Everything became easier since I started really understanding object-oriented programming, greatly by virtue of different ways of backing into it, such as the Python module system and the named tuple system. Everything became easier since I started listening to what people like Kenneth Wrights, the developer of the requests Python package in PyPy, or actually it's pronounced PyPI, the Python Packaging Index, gotta get that pronunciation right, which is undergoing great improvement in itself as it gets off the old system that's been a little bit enhanced by the Wheels package, but is going to be dramatically enhanced after a forthcoming overhaul that I heard about on the podcasts. Everything has become easier since I started listening to the various podcasts, and my apologies to Podcast Dunder Init and Tobias and the other guy who've been podcasting for as long as the other one that I've been touting all this time, Talk Python to Me with Michael Kennedy. Chalk it up to that first episode. It was painful to listen to, and I just didn't categorize it with the top tier stuff, which it is. Go listen to it. Podcast __init __, or there's a dot in there too. Learning all that dunder init stuff, very important. Learning about how init announces a directory as a package, very important. I think it's called the site-extensions directory as being the place where packages distributed over pip get installed. Understanding virtual env, and all of the sudden having to understand Conda, alternative side-by-side thing to virtual env. But if you're using Anaconda, you suddenly stop using virtual env and start using a combination of Conda and pip, which creates a nightmare when you're creating your request.txt file. And I have to cover that topic. Damn, that person's going like 90 or 100. Whew. Okay, anyway. I am starting to appreciate how things are cleaning up gradually in Python generationally. The Python 2.7 people are a different generation of Python lovers than the 3.5ers and soon to be 3.6ers. I mean, We're more than halfway through 3 by now. Yet, the things people love about 2.x, starting from about 2.5, particularly 2.6, and especially 2.7, are love-worthy in themselves. And people like Kenneth, who made requests, you know, you can totally hear him pine for the days of 2.7 dominance and how painful it was for him to port requests, but ultimately worth it, to 3.x. There was a lot of magic voodoo that was possible under 2.x because of the way it didn't precisely differentiate Unicode data from byte data. And you could transform one to the other with some just magic different ways you referred to it using the duck typing. It felt very appropriate to Python people and had a sort of magic aspect to it where stuff could flow from the byte world to the Unicode world very freely. Not good API design. Python 3.x fixes that by making everything by default in 3.x that you would normally think of as a string data type as a Unicode data type. The string data type in Python 3.x is unitype for all intents and purposes. There's still some explicit conversion that you can do between things, but you can't go using the unitype function like you used to. Use the string function under 2.x. It'll throw an error, and you gotta refactor your code. And 2.x code won't just run under 3.x. It's gotta go through a conversion. So I haven't really written so much of a code base that I have a painful conversion. I would if I were converting the existing incarnation of Pipulate to 3.5, but I'm not gonna. I am gonna get an implementation of Pipulate down to as few lines of code and as elegantly stated as I can under Python 3.5 under Jupyter Notebook. And that project is SEO Notebook. SEO Notebook is an implementation of the Pipulate spec. The Pipulate spec is something I'm writing as I create SEO Notebook, using all the Pipulate type stuff I've done in the past as inspiration for the Pipulate spec, of which SEO Notebook is an implementation of that spec that directly uses the ready-to-run sample Pipulate functions. Other implementations of Pipulate should be able to use that package directly. Import Pipulate, start using those functions, but make all the looping constructs however you like. Maybe it'll exist under pandas one day for an extra level of API in there to do matrices transformation stuff and join SQL-like join stuff between multiple data sources. And I could abstract that even more with, what's that called? It's, I forget, but there's something that lets you really treat data sources as abstractions. Blaze, that's what it's called. Or perhaps I go the other direction and just start taking up different languages and start doing Pipulate implementations under JavaScript and every other language I should cut my teeth on and see if I can shed some new light onto better Pipulation implementations because of the languages they're being implemented in. Well, anyway, I think I've really rambled on enough there. What am I up to? Almost a half hour. This is like a TV program without commercials. It's too dark to even see me, and I want to pay attention to my exits now, so thanks for joining me. Hope to see you again soon. If you can bear coming back after this, I'd be interested to see who reaches the end. Who are you? Post a comment. Thumb up this video. interact and engage with me on the comments of the video if, by some miraculous chance, you actually are hearing this. And don't forget to subscribe.